Hey guys, welcome back to Project Bodybuilding. Today is a special day because it is in fact my birthday. It really is unfortunate I keep having these, but this is a good excuse to roll out a big comparison. I thought about a couple of ideas for a video today, but I settled on a legacy comparison. What do I mean by legacy comparison? Well, when I do comparisons, they're fairly relevant, but I want to start doing some comparisons with older bodybuilders. Golden era guys, 90s era guys that aren't that relevant, but ones I want to do and think would make good comparisons. So why not start today? In today's video, we're going to compare two of my favorite physiques ever. And you read the title, you know those two physiques are going to be Jay Cutler from his 2009 winning Olympia comeback, and Dorian Yates at the 1993 Olympia where he solidified himself as a dominant champion. Now, are these the best versions of each guy? It's pretty close. I do think Jay was better in 2001, but pics from back in the day are hard to come by, let alone high quality pics. So honestly, the 2009 version might as well be the best because it's the best surviving version in terms of high quality photos. And even if the 01 pics were available, Jay's second best version was easily 2009, so we're still using one of Jay's peak versions. In Dorian's case, I just got lucky and stumbled across some good photos. Was 1993 his best version? If you ask me, yes. This was before injuries, he was fresh, and his stomach and midsection were a lot more streamlined. I get how some people may prefer the 94 or 95 version, or maybe some of the other versions like the British Grand Prix, but I still prefer 1993. He wasn't his biggest or his most shredded, but like I said, he didn't have that awful torn bicep, and his aesthetics were at their best for this level of size. And I do think the 93 version is the most famous version with all the hype around it. Like those famous 3-week out photos and that infamous 1-year transformation pic. So all in all, arguments can be made that I'm not using either guy's best physique, but because we have to work with what we got, and honestly there are arguments for these versions to be each gentleman's best, I'm not upset about using the versions I did. Anyway, we have a great comparison today regardless, one I really want to do thoroughly, so let's cut the intro and jump into the video. If you guys like these types of videos and want to see more, hit that like button and subscribe to stay up to date on all my future videos. We're starting off with a bang in the first front shot, the front double. I really expected Dorian to lose this one easily, but he stacks up quite well. Keep in mind, this is 1993. Dorian had yet to tear his bicep, and after that, his symmetry was just so off, obviously. But also, I felt that the intact arm suffered after that point as well. But in 1993, his arms were decent. Even though they were one of his weaker body parts, I wouldn't call them weak overall. Here in 93, he had a fairly decent set of arms. I'm definitely glad I picked this version over the later versions for this reason alone. Here, the arms are hard and they're very dry, and his biceps I don't really find a flaw in. Maybe you can argue they need a little bit more peak, but some people like that longer, fuller look anyway, so it's hard to call that a major flaw. Surprisingly enough, the biggest problem I have with Dorian's arms are the triceps. Maybe it's the lighting casting shadows, but it doesn't look like he has that much tricep sweep. Which if you know anything about Dorian, you'll know that his tris are one of his best body parts. But from this angle, his biceps are actually overpowering his triceps. Does Dorian bring the best set of arms here? No, but it's still a fairly decent set, much better than anything he brought after this point. But if you take a look at Jay's arms, it's not hard to see why I prefer him in this area. The tricep sweep is there and the bis are a bit fuller, especially on that left one. I do see the lack of symmetry between his biceps and his left and right arm, but Dorian had a lack of balance too. Not between both arms, but between each arm's bi and tri. Jay's right arm is not torn or anything, it just happens to be smaller. The bi still peaks and the tricep still hangs, but there is a notable difference which does hurt him through the arms. If he had that left arm transplanted on his right, the arms would be a slam dunk for him. But honestly, I want to see two developed arms in this pose, and one arm is absolutely great, while the other arm just happens to be better than Dorian's. And because Dorian's arms are fairly okay in this pose, he gets close because of Jay's lack of symmetry. Don't get me wrong, Jay still wins, but he's not perfect either. But let's move on. I look for two main things in this pose, arms and structure. Sure, other things are factors, but the arms and the X-frame / silhouette are first and foremost. It may have been underwhelming in the arms for both guys once we considered everything, but Jay gets an easy win in the structure department. His lats surprisingly jut out more here. I do think Dorian's lats are better, it would be stupid to say otherwise, but Jay's higher lats are going to help him in this pose specifically. Since they're a bit higher and jut out more at the top, it makes the upper body look super wide. This counteracts his bigger waist. Jay never had the smallest waist at all, but that massive amount of width from the lats to the huge rib cage makes his waist look small by comparison. And downstairs, his legs are notoriously good. This was the year of the famous quad stomp. The legs are just shredded to pieces, so much separation, and they're so dry. They also sweep a lot, which helps minimize his waist from the bottom up. And we have to talk about the calves too, because both of these guys actually have great calves. I do think Dorian has the best calves of any Mr. Olympia winner ever, but Jay is up there, maybe second best. It's always a nice touch when you have a massive set of calves on top of everything else. So anyway, even though Jay has a fairly wide waist, everything around him makes it look very small. He's so massive and wide up top, and the legs sweep from the bottom, so both areas can create an illusion for him. Overall, he just looks so impressive. I'm blown away by this shot for him. Dorian's structure is slightly underwhelming. He's not as massive as Jay Cutler structurally. They're both big dudes, but Jay I think is more of an endomorph. He has a pretty wide waist and big joints, but he outran most of those flaws in this pose. And because he did that, he got to keep the good aspects of the endomorphic physique. Dorian has a good X-frame, but Jay's is better and his flow is better too. Dorian's upper body is pretty wide, his lats do help with that, and his waist is tight and smaller than Jay's, but Dorian doesn't have the best quad sweep. His legs are good, the teardrop is huge, but they're fairly narrow, which hurts his overall X-frame. Is it okay? Yeah, but Jay is just much more impressive. His proportions are more exaggerated and he's more massive while maintaining those proportions. So with this easy win in the structure department and the smaller win in the arms, Jay takes the first pose fairly easily. The front double was maybe a clear win for Jay, I would call it, but the front lat is a dominant win for Dorian. I think we all saw this coming. Surprise, surprise, the guy with probably the best lats of all time wins the front lat spread. Now Jay's pose is not bad, far from it. Jay is really thickly developed here and complete. The chest is so thick, the arms and delts are full, and the legs are insane. And the most important piece, the lats, are good for Jay too. They insert very nicely and his taper is really good. But like how Jay was in the front double, here in the front lat, Dorian is just much more exaggerated. Dorian's lats are double the size of Jay's and his taper is overall better as a result. Dorian also has some good other elements. Jay's chest was a bit thicker and had a bit more mass on it, but I do like Dorian's pecs more. His chest is also pretty thick, but he's much more detailed. Even in this low-res photo, we can see he has plenty of striations. Jay doesn't have a single one. In the arms and shoulders is a similar story. Jay's fuller, but I prefer Dorian. The separation in the shoulders, biceps, tris, and brachialis is great. And Dorian has Jay in the forearms too, but I think you guys probably already knew that. Even Dorian's lower body looks better here than it did in the front double. I think because his wide lats are making his waist appear cinched from the top down, this is actually helping his legs look wider. A smaller waist is going to make your legs look bigger even if it's an illusion. Bodybuilding is an illusion after all. I still prefer Jay's for the better separation and more complete development of all the muscles of the thighs, but Dorian's do look much better than in the front double. He's still very separated, and again, that teardrop is crazy. Overall, this pose is such an easy win for Dorian. Let's head to the next one. The side chest is an interesting pose. Going into this pose, I thought Jay would have this in the bag. Dorian's weakest body parts were his arms and chest after all, and Jay was so huge I thought that thickness would translate to a slam dunk in this pose. But this is surprisingly close. I really see this as a quality versus quantity battle. I was at least correct about Jay's extra mass. He's clearly the thicker individual overall. The side leg is much better than Dorian's. Dorian may have cleaner separation there, but with the head start and size Jay had and his posing where he's crouching down a lot more, he has a lot more hamstring drop and quad size. So I have Jay downstairs. Going up top, Jay is bigger overall, yes. He wins in terms of size everywhere, even the pecs, and the arms and shoulders as well. And he is wider shoulder to shoulder, we saw that in the front double. But take a look at Dorian. His arms and shoulders are more detailed. However, here though, in general in the arms and shoulders, I do prefer a thicker, fuller arm and delt, so I do think Jay wins here regardless, but the chest is a way more contentious area. Dorian's far pec is surprisingly thick and ripped. He's sporting much more striations than Jay. But Jay does have a few fibers poking through here, unlike in the front lat spread. This is how it comes down to quality versus quantity. Jay is bigger everywhere, but Dorian is more shredded and still fairly thick where it matters, mainly the pecs. This is the closest shot so far. I can see an argument for both. But for me, like the most muscular, the side chest has always been about superior mass and thickness. That's why I have to go with Jay. The side chest is all about how thick someone is from the side and the pecs. Those are the two things we look for. For the first one, overall thickness, it's not a comparison. In the pecs, I think it's close regardless of what side of the quantity versus quality argument you fall on. I really don't even want to pick a winner for this area. One day I can go with Jay for the bigger pecs, another I can go with Dorian for more detail. Honestly, I think I would probably side with Jay more often in this scenario, but for now I'm actually giving the edge to Dorian. But since it's so close in the pecs and Jay wins everywhere else and is so much more thickly developed, I'm giving the slight edge in the side chest to Jay. Now we're getting to Dorian's best poses, the back poses. He was renowned for his world-class back, with some touting it as the best back of all time. So does Jay even have a chance here? Well, not really, but I am going to say something crazy here. I'm not denying Dorian wins this pose. To argue against that would be blasphemy in the bodybuilding community, and you should lose all credibility if you do so. But still, I like Jay's pose more. And I do think he gets closer than I expected. Now, it's not nipping at Dorian's heels or anything like that, but Jay is respectable even standing next to Dorian. I'm really trying to watch my words here because I know those Dorianites are going to say I'm completely wrong, but this is just my opinion. Dorian objectively wins. End of story. It's not close. Is Jay closer than I thought he would be? Sure. But he's still trailing. So what do I like about Jay? Well, overall he is bigger, and I'm just more impressed with the sheer size of him. The main factor is how wide he is. In the rear double, he is actually wider than Dorian, which I find a little odd. Dorian Dorian was twice as wide in the front lat spread, and we all know how the rear lat spread is going to go. But in the rear double, his lats seem to tuck away. It's not super important. Density, detail, and thickness are all way more important in the rear double over width, but Jay's width and the immense physique just draws my eyes to him more. But that's really about it. Jay just impresses me more off the jump due to him being wide as a barn door and being thickly developed everywhere else. But come on now, Dorian is better, plain and simple. His lats may not be that wide in this shot, but they're fully developed and dang near insert at the glutes. Jay, on the other hand, had the big Rami problem going on. A lot of people don't mention this, but in later years, Jay's lats were definitely starting to retreat. This would have been a better shot for the 2001 version because he had much better lower lats back then, but even then Dorian would still be more developed. And it's not just the lats that are better in this region on Dorian, it's the entire lower back. Dorian's lat insertions are jagged and gnarly, building a great Christmas tree. Jay, on the other hand, only showcases skin folds. Now moving up to the upper back, this is where Jay stands the best chance. This is the only reason Jay can even be in the same room as Dorian. His upper back is quite thick. This goes for his delts, which are probably even with Dorian's. The same goes for his delts, which are probably about even with Dorian's. And Jay rounds this area out with the much better arms, especially bicep peaks. So Jay's really full here and pretty thick, but Dorian is very dry and detailed. Dorian isn't packing that much fullness, but he's the denser of the two and he's in better condition, which reveals all of that detail. We saw this in the lower back, he was just much more defined. The same goes for all those upper back muscles. Now let's quickly jump down to the lower body. Jay's glutes are starting to show some good striations, but he has some folds there too. Dorian has those neat and deep striations, and Dorian's glutes aren't as developed as Jay's, which is a good thing. Jay's caboose has even started gobbling up his posing trunks. Now in the hamstrings, I think both guys would be served with better lighting. Dorian needs brighter lights and Jay's are a little too harsh. Now Jay, at prejudging under those lights, actually stacked up a little bit better here, but I decided to use his finals photo because his back was better. But even in that prejudging photo, only Jay's detail was helped. For overall mass and thickness of the hams, you just have to go with Dorian. He doesn't have the gnarly shape to his hams, but he's more developed here. And that's really the story for the entire pose. Is he the fullest in the back? Well, definitely not the upper back, but the detail is there and it's no contest when it comes to overall development. The glutes are Dorian's and the hams are Dorian's too for having more massive ones, so even though I was really trying to hype Jay up in the beginning and I do like him more still, this isn't a contest. Dorian has one of, if not the best back of all time and a great rear double pose. He takes this one easily. I really tried to hype Jay up to do the impossible in the rear double and defeat Dorian, but in the rear lat spread, there is absolutely no scenario in this universe where Dorian loses this shot. And that may be true against anyone ever, actually. Now, truth be told, I was never a huge fan of Dorian's front double. Is it good? Yeah, it's great, but honestly, I don't think he's the best of all time. He's definitely in the top 3, no doubt, along with Ronnie and Phil. However, Dorian's rear lat spread is the best of all time. Ronnie, Derek, Phil, whoever you want to put up there next to Dorian in this pose, they're all getting sent packing. And that includes Jay very easily. It's not that Jay is bad, but he's not even in the conversation for having one of the best rear lat spreads of all time. And the other bodybuilders that are, as I just said, can't even hold a candle to Dorian. Dorian has it all. The width is insane for one. He isn't the tallest guy. He's still fairly tall for a bodybuilder at 5'10", sure, but there have been taller guys. And he never possessed the absolute best shoulder to shoulder width. Heck, I'd even say Jay is wider. But Dorian's lats make up for all of that and then some. Like I said, shoulder to shoulder, Jay is probably a bit wider. Jay's a big guy. But Dorian is literally twice as wide as him and 3 times as detailed. And the lower body is more or less the same story as in the rear double, so there's just no way Jay can stand up to Dorian on this one. Again, Jay's shot isn't bad. His hams are pretty nasty in a good way. The back is kind of smooth, but he still has some good width, and I like how his taper looks on this one. This is a solid rear lat spread, an 8 out of 10 pose if you ask me. This just shows how freaky and how dominant Dorian is on this one. He's the best to ever do it. I don't need to go on. Dorian makes it 3 for 3 in what is one of his other best shots, the side try. The lat spreads and the side try, those are the poses Dorian is known for, and we can see why. Dorian's a mass monster, but he's so iconic in this pose that he ends up looking like a statue because he set the standard of what a good modern side try is. Jay does still measure up better than I thought. This is really because of one thing though. Mass. He is super thick, super full, and yeah, brings more overall size, but Dorian has better polish, conditioning, and when you go body part for body part, Dorian scores some key wins. Let's start with the lower body since this is Jay's best chance to score one of those wins. I think Jay is still bigger here like in the side chest, but also like in the side chest, Dorian has cleaner separation. And here in the side try, Dorian is still a tad behind in size, but it's much closer than in the last side pose. Overall, give this one to who you want. I think now that Dorian is closer in terms of size and still has the drier, more detailed leg, I gotta go with him. And his calves are better too. He's still a monster in that regard. But if you just want size, go with Jay. This area is kind of trivial anyway, and we'll see why in a second. Now shift your gaze up to the midsection. It's no contest. I know a lot of people hate on Jay's abs for being asymmetrical, messy, and being on top of a big waistline. Those are valid critiques, but credit where it's due, I think his midsection looks okay here. The abs have some blockiness, it's almost bordering on too much, but he has some good separation in them too. I do wish he had more oblique cuts though. When you look at Dorian though, he clearly has the better midsection. For one, it's more sunken in, his waistline is just tighter, and when you factor in Dorian's much more detailed obliques, he's more developed in the midsection as a whole. Going up just a little bit more, I'm giving Dorian the pecs too. Jay's extra thickness, at least through this region, really dissipates when he hits the side tri. And since the thickness is comparable and Dorian is a little harder in the pecs, he gets a small win here. Now let's go to the del. Again, comparable in size, but Dorian has a little more detail, thus gets another small win. And now we're at the pinnacle of the pose, the tricep. This is a no-brainer. Jay's tri is okay, but Dorian's is next level. He's more developed and he has more size, but perhaps more importantly is the shape he has to his tricep. He's got a very pronounced, jagged horseshoe that completely fills up the backside of his arm. And after taking a solid win of the tricep and then adding in that huge Popeye forearm, Dorian wins the entire arm for me. Zooming back out, I had Dorian winning every part of this pose. Even if Jay got the side leg, that can't make up for Dorian's better tricep, which of course is weighted more in this pose. This is just another dominant win for Dorian. He's now on a 3-pose winning streak heading into the next one. The abs and thighs is a conflicting pose. Look, we all know that this was the year that Jay did that crazy quad stomp. It's one of the most famous bodybuilding photographs of all time, and for good reason. Look at the freakiness in the quads. Every single muscle of the thighs is developed. A lot of the times guys have good proportion in their thighs but miss a couple of things here and there. The quads and thighs as a whole are a huge muscle group. It's hard to develop all areas of them fully, but Jay managed to do just that. From the adductors to the vastus lateralis, this is one of the most complete set of thighs ever. And really when you factor in the hams, Jay had some of the most complete legs ever in general. Everything is developed, he has good sweep and size, and the detail and separation is off the charts. That's actually the best part. We see huge quads from time to time. Nexzilla, Big Ramy, and others are famous for having huge quads, but those guys lack a key element, detail. Jay has everything when it comes to detail. He has deep separation between every muscle and sports some of the most abundant feathering I've seen. I think there are very few people who can beat Jay Cutler in the quads from 09. Some may have the size, and sure Jay isn't the most massive in the wheels, but they're complete and totally developed, and the shreds seal the deal for him over so many other would-be contenders, including Dorian Yates. Dorian really never stood a chance here. I've said it a couple times now, but Dorian's quads were narrow. Not only that, but even though Dorian was better in overall condition, Jay's quads were more detailed. Regardless of how Jay looks, I just think Dorian's quads are underwhelming. Good, but they do have flaws, but then when you add Jay in, it's no comparison. But this is the abs and thighs pose, so what about the abs? Well, this is where the competitors flip. Dorian is better in the abs, while Jay is the one lagging behind here. Jay's waist is big, I've said it several times now, and the abs are pretty asymmetrical. And they were honestly looking better in a couple of other poses like the side tri. The separation was much deeper there. But now he's not crunching down, which makes his abs look a little bit more shallow. And no, this isn't a poorly timed pick, Jay's doing this on purpose. His waist is already wide as it is. Would that little bit of extra ab definition he would get by crunching down more be worth making his waist look even wider? His obliques are already spilling over. Crunching down would just be an overall net loss for Jay. He's stuck between a rock and a hard place though, because I do wish he had more ab separation, but what was the alternative? And Jay's final nail in the coffin for the upper body as a whole is the complete lack of taper. His waist is just too wide. Even with how wide he was looking through the lats, he can barely make anything that somewhat resembles taper. Now Dorian wins this area for being the exact opposite of Jay. Dorian's abs are more deeply etched and they're on top of a much smaller waist. And with a smaller waist and the huge lats, Dorian actually has some really good taper. And he looks like handsome Squidward. Dorian is winning up top pretty easily, so now we're in a position where each guy won half the pose. I was actually leaning towards Jay at first in order to break the tie, but then I stumbled across this picture of Dorian, and now it's completely up in the air. Dorian in this pic, at least up top, is just so much more aesthetically pleasing. And in this photo, the quads look a little bit better too. But I still think Jay wins the shot, but by the slimmest of margins. Does Dorian have the better abs and a better midsection? Yes. Is Jay's the absolute worst? No. I would say it's below average because of the lack of taper and deep separation, but he's still got some okay abs and he doesn't have a bubble gut. This is far from the worst set of abs to win than Mr. Olympia. Then in terms of the lower body, it's still a resounding win. Dorian's quads looked a little better, but Jay is just still blowing him out of the water. And here's what I think. Jay wins the quads more than Dorian wins the abs. Jay is just too freaky downstairs. And because Jay's abs are at least something and he schools Dorian in the quads, I'm going with him. I can definitely go with anyone here. Dorian almost had me, and if you ask me tomorrow, that can definitely be the case. He wins in the aesthetics department after all. But I think Jay has the best average of both components of the pose, and I do think Jay on stage would look more impressive. We're ending with another battle because I think the most muscular is one of those poses that can go either way. Jay has a terrific pose, it's just about textbook. Really, his only flaw is the lack of chest detail. He should have just flexed it harder. But other than that, he's perfect. The legs are terrific again, diced to pieces. The arms are full, the biceps peak nicely on the inside of his arms, and the tricep sweep is good. And he doesn't blur the line between arm and delt. Throughout the arms, he is neatly separated and the delts are detailed and popping. The traps are also jutting out very nicely. He has very good insertions on those. So overall, Jay looks super full, but at the same time, besides the chest, he has good detail and separation everywhere. Even the midsection looks very respectable. He's keeping it locked in and not using this pose as an excuse to let it hang out. Dorian's pose is quite good too. I think he's a lot flatter than Jay, which is something pretty evident to me by the end of this comparison, but he still has a ton of muscle. The chest is super thick and the amount of striations in those pecs totally eclipse Jay's. Dorian's traps are pretty good, pretty thick, but I prefer Jay's easily for having that 3D look to his traps. Now in the delts, I think the flatness unfortunately comes back to be a factor here for Dorian. Dorian's delts are grainy, but Jay's have a more pleasing look. From rear to front delt, Jay is fully developed and popping a lot more. Dorian is looking a bit flat by comparison. I think the rear delts don't have much life to them, and the shoulders as a whole don't have that capped look of Jay's. But nonetheless, the mass is still there. But then we get to Dorian's major flaw in this pose, the arms. His arms are just straight up bad from this angle. They're too small, plain and simple, and even though he hasn't torn that left bicep yet, it kinda looks like he already did. With his arms being so small and the delts being so large, the delts end up overpowering his arms, making them look even smaller. The arms aren't all of the pose, but it's still a notable flaw. Finally, going downstairs, the lower body on Dorian looks really good. Funnily enough, I think this has been the best pose for his quads. They really don't look narrow here, and the separation is probably the best here as well. And those calves, massive. Is this area a win for Dorian? Still no, Jay is way too detailed down there, but Dorian looks better than normal. Overall, in this pose as a whole, I think Dorian does score less wins. Through the arms and the shoulders, I prefer Jay easily. Dorian's poor arms are on full display and his delts are flat, while Jay is as full as a house and has 3D arms and delts. And the legs, I prefer Jay easily as well. The only area Dorian gets a win in is the chest. He's very thick and more detailed than Jay. Overall, Dorian brings a very dense and grainy look through the chest and delts, but he falls off in the arms but picks himself up a little in the legs. And I really like that dense, grainy look, but I think Dorian took it a bit too far. I think if he was a bit fuller, not super over-dieted like he always was, this isn't a new thing I'm bringing up, but if he did that, I think he would have stood a better chance. Jay just impresses me more. He's super full, super round, and more complete, with the only flaw of his being the chest detail. He's wider through the shoulders again and has all that 3D muscle on top of it. Even if Dorian was more muscular, which I think he is actually, you wouldn't know it from this pic because Jay is more complete with better muscle bellies and superior fullness. I'm just much more impressed with Jay, and he's more complete, at least in this pose. Well, wouldn't you know, this ended up being a very close one. A tie game, actually. Dorian won the front lat, both back poses, and the side try. Jay won the front double, side chest, abs and thighs, and most muscular. I was really hoping this wouldn't come down to a tie in this comparison because now I have to break that tie, and these are some of the most famous physiques from some of the most liked bodybuilders of all time. So I'm probably going to make at least one group mad. But I can say for both groups of people, the Dorian Yates and all the Cutler crew, I can say one thing. I firmly believe either man can be the winner. If you ran this scenario 100 times on stage, both guys are at least taking some wins. But I don't think it's 50-50. I do think someone would win more often. And I do think that guy would be Dorian Yates. If we take a look at all the poses Dorian won, those are poses he had big victories in. Those back poses were lights out, and the front lat spread and side try were easy victories too. But what about the poses Jay won? Some of them weren't that convincing. The front double was a good win for Jay, but others could argue that Dorian had better aesthetics this year, and his arms were a lot better too. And those things would be enough for him to prevail over a blocky Jay. I think the side chest was slightly more close than the front double. Jay didn't have the better pecs. He was just more massive and full overall. So I can see a Dorian win there in some scenarios. And for the abs and thighs, I actually feel I went against the grain. I think the more popular decision would have been to have Dorian winning. And honestly, if you look solely through an aesthetic lens and that's all you want, that would be an easy win for Dorian in that abs and thigh shot. And in the most muscular, I do think that was Jay's most convincing win, but Dorian brings some thick, granite hard muscle in that shot. So overall, if you were to add up those poses where Jay was a little iffy, which was just about every one of his wins, I think this could easily be a comparison that has Dorian winning 5, 6, maybe even 7 shots on any given day. But I still think it would be somewhat close. Jay was really full here and didn't have too many flaws. His back was the weakest thing on him, and it was far from bad. You'll recall that I actually liked his rear double pose a lot, and his rear lat spread is a great pose objectively. He just happened to be going up against maybe the best back ever. I honestly think Dorian roughly had the same level of flaws. His biceps were fairly weak in some shots, and the legs were pretty narrow, which got exposed a lot against Jay's amazing quads. Then when we talk about mass and conditioning as a whole, each guy takes a win. Dorian had better polish, he was shredded, sometimes I think too shredded because he was a little flat in some areas. But Jay had better fullness, roundness, etc. But hey, that hurt him at times too, like Dorian's conditioning did with him. Jay was smooth in some areas. So Dorian takes more poses more often while having better conditioning. But I have a big hunch that on stage next to Jay, Dorian may not look as impressive from a size and proportion perspective. So I think it's close, and so do you guys. I asked you guys who you had winning between these two famous versions, and just barely Dorian won that poll. And after accounting for several factors, I agree with those results. I do not see this as a slam dunk for Dorian, but I think he would have his day more often than not. I think about 60 to 70 times out of 100, Dorian is prevailing. That added conditioning, that granite hard mass, and his ability to hide his flaws in the mandatories would be hard to beat. Jay's only hope would be being fuller and looking like a different type of freak. And hey, I do have to say, Jay is my personal favorite out of this comparison. Jay's 09 physique is one of my favorites. I think his freaky quads, better proportions, and fullness suit my taste more. But at the same time, Dorian is actually my favorite bodybuilder of all time. He never had one of my favorite physiques, but as a bodybuilder as a whole, he's hands down my favorite. So maybe there's a little bias for Jay in there, cutting into Dorian's margin of victory on this one. But I do think objectively, Jay would win in some scenarios if he ran it enough. However, Dorian would still win a majority of the time. And that's the case today. Between this comparison of some of the most famous physiques of all time over the 2009 Jay Cutler, I'm giving the slight edge to today's winner, the 1993 Dorian Yates.
No doubt I know I will go so far.